So welcome to today's podcast, and I am very excited to be joined by Diane Danzebrink, who is the founder of Menopause Support, which is a not-for-profit community interest company and the home of the national Make Menopause Matter campaign. Diane is a passionate activist and advocate for better menopause education, information, care and support for everyone, and to ensure we're the generation to make menopause matter. So welcome, Diane. I'm really excited to have you on this podcast to discuss something that affects a huge proportion of women in the UK and worldwide.
Hello, thank you for inviting me. Yes, it does indeed affects everybody, because it affects half of the population directly, and undoubtedly it affects the other half indirectly, because there's nobody wandering around on the planet who doesn't know a female, even if they're not female and they're not going to experience it themselves. So it does ultimately affect everybody, whether it's in workplaces, in relationships. You know, there are all sorts of potentials in terms of the effects of menopause. And it's lovely to be speaking to you in Menopause Awareness Month, just before World Menopause Day on the 18th.
Yeah, I'm really pleased that we're actually having this conversation, because I read a statistic which was something crazy, like 30 million women in the UK will be experiencing either peri or menopause.
Yeah, that 13 million figure is one that gets shared a lot. And you know, when you think about the size of the UK population, I think it's probably fairly accurate.
It's massive. And I think also just understanding, like we had briefly chatted, that there are so many different symptoms that people might not necessarily be aware of. And understand that actually this could potentially be the start, because perimenopause is something that can start can go on for about 10 years or plus, couldn't it?
Yeah, so I think so. I think it's probably important that we recognise that menopause is a diverse experience. So for some, they will experience what doctors might call a natural or a spontaneous menopause. So that's where somebody begins with perimenopause. So this is where the hormone levels start to change. And at some point, periods will start to change. And that's followed by the clinical definition of menopause, which doctors will tell you is 12 consecutive months without a period. And that's followed by postmenopause. So that's basically all of the years following menopause. And for a lot of people, they'll live, 30, 40 years of their lives postmenopausally. The average age of that 12 months without a period in the UK is around 51, 52. Most people are perimenopausal by the time they're 45. But it's also really important that we understand that that's not everybody's experience. So for some people, they will experience a premature menopause. So this is where it happens under the age of 40. For others, they'll experience an early menopause, which is where it happens between the ages of 40 and 45. And then for some, their menopause will be medically induced. So that's where they're having medical treatment or they're taking medication, which actually brings on menopause symptoms. And that's generally because it has an effect on the function of their ovaries. Or you might have people like me who go into a surgical menopause, and that's where somebody has both of their ovaries removed at the same time. So it's definitely not a one size fits all.
Yeah, and actually that would be a great place to start with your story and your background and how you actually even got into doing what you're doing today.
So it did absolutely start with my experience. We go a long way back now. We go back to 2012. when I had to have surgery, it was suspected that I had ovarian cancer. So I had both of my ovaries, my womb, my fallopian tubes, and my cervix removed all at the same time. Unfortunately for me, I wasn't given any information, guidance, or support about being plunged into surgical menopause in my mid 40s. Um, I thought that menopause was hot flushes and no more periods. I'd had horrific periods for more than 20 years, so not having any more periods was not an issue for me. And if I'm honest with you, when somebody says they think you've got ovarian cancer, you want your ovaries removed yesterday. Um, I was never offered the opportunity to go back and have a follow up appointment despite having significant surgery. I was never asked back to see the gynecologist or any of their team. And I was simply told when I left the hospital about 36 hours later that if I needed to see my GP, then I should make an appointment if I felt I needed to. That was my care. Um, I did on one occasion see a GP, but that was only really to look at my scar. And eventually I needed to have my stitches removed also at the GP practice. And there was a fleeting mention at some point of hormone replacement therapy. And I just my eyes were wide and I sort of reeled back in my chair I just said, no, thank you. Because I'd heard really scary stuff about HRT. And I had no idea that it was really important for me because that was where the conversation ended. There was no question about why I'd said no, thank you. What did I know about it? Nothing. And cutting a very long story short, for the first 3 months, I was actually doing all right. I probably had a few hot flushes, but nothing dreadful. And then about month 4, things went very wrong very quickly. And it was actually my mental health that was affected. I developed really crushing anxiety. I didn't want to leave the house. I didn't want to see anybody. I wouldn't answer the phone. Eventually, I got to the point where I wouldn't even open post because in my irrational brain, everything was going to be negative. It deteriorated and deteriorated. My husband and my mother tried their hardest to try to get me to go and see a doctor, but I was absolutely terrified because I thought I was going mad. And I had absolutely no idea that how I was feeling was related to my surgery because nobody had ever explained that there are psychological symptoms for some people, not for everybody, that can be related to menopause. And in surgical menopause, that can be, for some, not for everybody, that can be more drastic. And I think it was probably, I don't know, I'd have to go back and look at the dates exactly, but it was sort of between 7 and 8 months after my surgery. My sleep had just been horrendous. I was having to have my mum stay as often as possible so that my husband could go to work because he was so concerned about my mental health. And I woke up one morning and the world just felt so dark and so scary. And I just thought, I can't live like this. And later that day, I came very close to taking my own life. And a little dog called Henry saved it. And at that point, I told my husband what I'd almost done. He, without me knowing, contacted our doctor's practice and said that he needed help and he needed it that day. And I saw a doctor late that day, and I was so lucky because she knew exactly what had happened. And she took the time to explain to me that having this rapid depletion of hormones could, for some people, have an effect on their mental health. And that's what she felt had happened to me, and that she could help me because she knew what would improve things. And she then again mentioned hormone replacement therapy, and I shared my fears with her, but she did take the time to talk to me. And she gave me factual, up to date information, which made me feel so much better knowing that a medical health professional had taken the time to give me that information. And I did actually start using HRT patches that day. And it wasn't a miracle and it didn't work overnight, but slowly and surely things started to feel a little less dark and scary. And I would say it was probably about 3 months after I started, I suddenly started to think to myself, well, hang on a minute. Is it just me that's been really unlucky here? Or are there other people out there who haven't had the right information and support? Are there other people out there struggling? And of course, at this time it was 2013, so it wasn't TikTok and Instagram, it was chat rooms. So I started looking in chat rooms. And I was just horrified by what I was finding because I kept seeing the same things over and over again. I feel like I'm going mad. I don't know who I am anymore. I'm struggling at work. I'm struggling in my relationship. I don't understand what's happening to me. And I remember on one particular day knowing that I must feel better because I turned to my husband and I said, how the hell can this be right? We're half of the population and there are so many people out there struggling. If I ever feel like me again, I'm going to make damn sure I do something to change it. And ultimately, that's where Menopause Support as an organisation, the Make Menopause Matter campaign, and everything that I've done in the past 9 years, that's really where that all came from.
Incredible story, and I think many can probably relate to that one. So the Menopause Make Menopause Matter campaign, could you talk to that? Because that's actually a really important piece around the education of it, isn't it?
Yeah, so I started Menopause Support on my kitchen table alongside my day job at the time. So my background is in therapy and I had done professional nurse training in menopause. So I was focusing on supporting women going through menopause. So I started the organisation really to create a website to share good information, the thing that I had, I'd not had. And having run Menopause Support for 3 years, I was just hearing the same things on a daily basis over and over again. I can't get the right help from my GP practice. I'm not being supported in the workplace. Why the hell did nobody ever talk to me about this earlier in life? And why didn't I get any information about menopause before it came along? And I thought, well, they are their campaign aims. We need a national campaign. So on one particular evening, I think I just sort of got to the end of my tether and thought, okay, we need a campaign. So I've never been politically active. I sat and wrote the campaign with the four aims of having mandatory menopause training for all GPs and practice nurses, having menopause included in the RSE curriculum in schools, having guidance and support in every workplace, whether you employ one person or 100,000 plus, and also having a public health campaign for menopause funded at national level by government. To date, I launched it in Parliament in Westminster in October 2018. And to date, we have over 200,000 signatures on the petition. And we have achieved having menopause included in the curriculum in schools in England. And from last month, September, it's been decided that all new medical students will learn about menopause in a women's health module. So that's for the first time in history that all of our new medical students will learn. So we're moving in the right direction. And there has been a lot of work going on in the workplace. I was very fortunate last week to be invited to what's called the Care Show, which was running at Birmingham NEC, to speak to employers, managers, etc. Within the care sector. So, obviously, a really important sector in terms of those who employ women. So, things are moving in the right direction, but there is clearly still a very long way to go before we have the right education, information, guidance, and support for everybody freely available at the point of need. So, yeah, we're getting there slowly.
Yeah, but it's a fantastic start and achievement so far. And I think what would be really helpful to people is if we could perhaps have a chat about the type of symptoms that people might face, whether perimenopause, like you say, there's so many different ways that menopause can be triggered. My own personal experience, my mother had surgically induced menopause at the age of 35. And then was put onto HRT and is still at age 70 on HRT. So HRT is one of those subjects that I think has had a huge amount of press, negative for a long time. Could you explain what is HRT and is it worth everybody considering HRT?
Okay, so shall we do symptoms first and then come to management options? Okay, so very simply, symptoms fall into three categories. So physical, cognitive, and psychological. So physical symptoms, lots of people will have heard of hot flushes and night sweats, but there are lots of others. So it could be things like heart palpitations, achy joints and muscles, dry eyes, dry mouth, changes to your hair, itchy skin. So if anybody would like to sort of have a look at symptoms, we have a symptom checker as a free resource on the Menopause Support website. So that's menopausesupport.co.uk, and you just click on free resources and you'll find that amongst lots of other things there. In terms of cognitive symptoms, you'll often hear them described as brain fog. And what we really mean are changes to memory and concentration. And then in terms of the psychological symptoms, I would say, are the ones that we hear about the most. And they're the ones that for a lot of people come along during their perimenopause, but they don't necessarily recognize that they could be related to hormone changes. And these are things like anxiety, low mood, mood fluctuation, perhaps feeling more emotional than you might normally feel. And that can be anything from angry all the way through to more tearful. And it might also include things like loss of confidence. And then there's one set of physical symptoms that we often hear from people they find very difficult to talk about because they're very personal. And they're what doctors call the genitourinary symptoms of menopause. So these are things like increased urinary frequency, urgency, increased urinary tract infections, or vulval and vaginal symptoms. And it's really important that we that we make people aware of those symptoms, because again, similar to the psychological symptoms, a lot of people would not relate them to whatever their menopause experience is. In terms of how do you manage your symptoms, well, that's a very personal decision. So, as you say, HRT's had a lot of bad press. It was certainly the thing that scared me, excuse me, a long time ago. But things have changed significantly, and we have lots of good factual evidence-based information now. So we have organisations like the British Menopause Society, like Women's Health Concern, like the International Menopause Society. We produced last year this booklet called Understanding Menopause, which is 44 pages of menopause information. including the symptoms and all of the potential management options. And this is written with the support of 4 British Menopause Society recognised specialists. So people can be sure that they're getting good factual evidence-based information. And again, this is available. If people want paper copies, we ask for a donation towards those. But if people just want to be able to download the information, you can download that free from the free resources on the website. So in terms of management options, a good place to start is with your kind of general health and well-being, thinking about how you're looking after yourself. So thinking about your nutrition, your movement, your sleep, your stress levels. So really easy things to say, much more difficult sometimes to assess, particularly if you're not feeling great. And then in terms of how the doctor can help you, so hormone replacement therapy is described by menopause societies as essentially the first line treatment option. And what that means is that it's the most effective treatment for symptoms for the vast majority. There are some who it wouldn't be first line treatment. So because of their medical history, it wouldn't be the first thing for them to try. And HRT now comes in lots of different forms. So it can be oral as a tablet, it can be transdermal as a patch, gel, or spray. If you're somebody who has had your womb removed, so you've had a hysterectomy, the vast majority of those people can use estrogen only. If you're somebody who has had your surgery because of severe endometriosis, then you're likely to be offered a progestogen as well. If you're somebody who still has your womb, then your HRT should be estrogen and a progestogen. How often you take those things depends on whether or not you're still having periods. And the choice of whether you have an oral product or a transdermal, so one that goes through your skin, should very much be about informed patient choice. It should be about you making that decision with your prescriber. There are what are called local estrogens. So these are very, very, very small doses. You might hear them called local, topical, or vaginal estrogens. And these are the ones that can be used either alongside systemic HRT, so that's HRT that goes through the body, or they can be used independently of HRT. And these are the ones that are used for those vulval, vaginal, and urinary symptoms. Then there are non-hormonal products. So GPs can prescribe some non-hormonal medications for those where HRT is either not first choice or it's not indicated as a first-line treatment due to their medical history. There are thousands of over-the-counter products now. Menopause has become an enormous money-making machine. It's a huge business. So we regularly see all sorts of random products having the word menopause put in front of them as a marketing tool. It's not to say that some people don't find some of those over-the-counter products helpful, but it is really important to do your homework. Because for most of them, there is very little independent research in terms of the particular product. So the information you're reading is much more likely to be marketing blurb than it is any kind of independent research. There are lots and lots of complementary practitioners and services available now for menopause. Again, I would really encourage people to do their homework. It's really important that whoever you're going to see has not just the relevant qualifications, but also the relevant experience to be able to help you. So just one example is that we do have a register of medical herbalists in the UK. So for some people, that is their first choice. If you're going to see a medical herbalist, it's important to recognise that we do have that listing, so you can find that listing to make sure that that person has the relevant qualifications, etc., to be able to help you. There are, of course, lots of other complementary therapies, but as I say, just do your homework is my biggest piece of advice. And then, of course, it's about finding those other things that help you. So for a lot of people, physical exercise is really helpful for them. Some people will turn towards things like yoga, Pilates, Tai Chi, etc., for their physical and their mental health. And for others, it's about making those kind of micro changes in your life. So it might be that perhaps you decide to delegate a little bit more in your life. Maybe there are lots of things that you continue to do that you've been sort of automatically doing for years, and you recognize now that maybe there are other people in your life that could take on some of those responsibilities. Maybe your children have grown up and maybe you don't need to do quite so much as you have typically always done. But it's also about micro changes in terms of managing your stress levels. So, you know, having a really simple breathing practice that you can turn to, recognizing when social media is becoming too much and, you know, being able to put that device down. I wrote quite a lot about this in the book. So back in May this year, Making Menopause Matter was published. So this is, it's very much a sort of a guide to navigating the menopause landscape for absolutely everybody. It's a very honest guide to what the menopause landscape looks like at the moment. And then through it is threaded some of my experience, the importance of making menopause matter for everybody, but also other people's experience of menopause too. And I don't know when this is going out, but when I was invited to write it, I had a conversation with the publishers and said, well, if it was up to me, I'd give it away because I want everybody to have this information. And they very kindly just reminded me that that's not how publishing works. But for October, Amazon have made the Kindle version. It's usually priced at $14.99 and they've reduced it to 99p. So I know that's not free, but it's about as close as we're going to come for 300 pages of information.
That's fantastic. And actually, just touching on something you mentioned about exercise, because I
Yeah.
think this is, and again, it goes back to the whole individual, how everyone is very different and how they experience the symptoms, and also what works with their symptoms. Managing symptoms is going to be difficult. Do you find, or have you heard anything around the types of exercise that should be avoided or restricted more so, and what we could do to build strength? Because I'm sure that kind of as the hormones decrease, you need to look at bone density and muscle strength. So do you have any recommendations for that?
So again, I think it's very individual, and I think it's sort of being very in touch with your body. So obviously, if you've got lots of joint pain, then you don't want to be doing something that's really exacerbating that. But, you know, national guidance is that we should all be doing around 2.5 hours exercise a week as a sort of, as a maintenance, if you like. For most people, that looks like around 30 minutes over 5 days during the week. And in terms specifically of menopause, it's really important that we're thinking about aerobic weight, you know, kind of having some kind of using some kind of weights, whatever that might be for you. So, and strength training. So, kind of weight bearing, strength training, and aerobic is a great combination because, as you say, we have to think about our bone health, but we also have to think about our muscle health. Bone health gets a lot of attention, but we also have to think about how well our muscles are functioning because obviously it's all part of the same system. We want to be looking after our cardiovascular health, we want to be looking after our mental health, etc. And we know that there's lots of great evidence-based research to tell us that exercise can have a significant effect on quality of life in terms of physical and mental health. But I do think that it's not just about what you should be doing. I think it's also about what you enjoy, because I think if you enjoy it, you're much more likely to do it.
Yes, completely agree. And we've had a few questions. This is something that many people have been discussing, and I'm really pleased that it is actually Menopause Awareness Month and we can get this out soon and people can enjoy that Kindle version for 99p of your book. Sleep is a big
Yes.
of discussion, and obviously the night sweats is going to feed into that. What can people do, firstly, to help with the night sweats or general hot flushes?
So I think in terms of sleep, there are several things to consider. So obviously, if night sweats is a significant symptom for you, then it is absolutely worth speaking to a medical health professional to talk through what the potential options are for you in terms of symptom management. But that's not everything. We also have to think about what you can do to help with your own sleep pattern. So there are things that we know can interrupt the sort of wind down to sleep, and they are, amongst others, alcohol and caffeine. So if you can avoid alcohol and definitely caffeine, if you love your caffeine, ideally try to keep it to the earlier part of the day, ideally before lunchtime, because that half and quarter life of caffeine can have an effect on your body actually winding down into the sleep process. As I said, we know how devices, kind of having screens in front of our faces, can interrupt that process too. So ideally, sort of not being focused on those at least a couple of hours before you go to sleep. And then in terms of your sleep environment, trying to have a cool environment, trying to make the fabrics of your bed as natural as possible. If you wear night clothing, trying to make that as natural as possible. Obviously, for a lot of people, they share their bed with somebody else, and that can be tricky because we don't necessarily all like the same temperature. If you are really struggling with night sweats, then there are things like cool pads that you can buy that can go on top of your sort of between your mattress and your sheet or whatever it is you cover your bed with. I know there's one that can go in the pillow. I know some people will use a sort of a very quiet fan because otherwise that can be disturbing. It's a good idea to have your bedroom as dark as possible. So if you have a lot of street lighting around you, it's a good idea to have things like a blackout blind. So I think there's several things to consider. One is your environment. One is your bed clothing and your own clothing, if you wear night clothing in bed. Another one is the things that can exacerbate symptoms and how you can perhaps try to avoid those. And then also what what are the potential management options that I can speak to a healthcare professional about that could perhaps help me with those? I think the really difficult thing, particularly about night sweats, is if they're not managed, obviously we have that broken sleep. That has an effect on our physical and our mental health. That can then lead to stress and anxiety, knowing that you're going into the same cycle less than 24 hours later. So I think it is about finding ways to break that cycle. And there's no doubt that for many people, hormone replacement therapy is significantly helpful for them. But as I say, for those who can't have it or don't choose to, then there are other options. But I think sometimes the conversation around menopause and management has become very either or. And I think what it is for most people is it's a combination of things.
Yeah, I think that's super helpful. Thank you for that. And on the food, so you mentioned caffeine.
Mm.
We had another question that came in. Are there any foods, apart from the obvious ones, kind of the sugar, maybe the spices might disrupt
Mm.
nights? Are there any foods that promote good sort of balanced hormones, and ones to avoid?
Um, are there foods that promote good not really. We do hear about things like the phytoestrogens. So the phytoestrogens, some people have always had a high phytoestrogen diet. So if you live in a part of the world where you've had a high phytoestrogen diet, there is conversation around whether or not that means that your menopause symptoms won't be perhaps as severe as somebody who has not had that diet. I don't think there is definitive evidence of that. We know that a lot of the supplements um, have phytoestrogens, but they are very, very weak. And if somebody is choosing to use them as part of their diet or their dietary supplementation, then providing there is no contraindication to any prescribed medication they're taking and they're finding it helpful, then sort of that's a choice for them to make. But I don't think we have a prescribed diet. What many dietitians and registered nutritionists tell us is that the Mediterranean diet is a good diet, not specifically for menopause, but it's a good diet for general health. So that's definitely something that's worth sort of looking into. If you're thinking, do you know what? I think my nutrition could be improved. Then it's definitely worth having a look at the Mediterranean diet, because that is often one that is spoken about when we're talking about how can we optimize our nutrition.
Brilliant, thank you. And finally, one of the questions, which actually I think is a really important one, is when to actually go and get, if you think you're having symptoms, when to go and get checked out. Somebody has asked about really heavy periods. Is that a symptom potentially?
Yeah, so that's two slightly different parts of the same question. So let's do the periods first. So I think another one of the myths that has grown up around menopause is when you get to perimenopause, your periods will become lighter, probably more erratic, and then they'll stop. Unfortunately, for some people, their periods don't become lighter; their periods actually become heavier. And that absolutely can be a symptom. In terms of when do I seek help? Well, I have a similar answer to that every time I'm asked it, and the answer is as soon as those symptoms have an effect on your quality of life. So as soon as you feel that you're being affected, that's the time to make the appointment and go and have that conversation.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. I think many people are going to have found huge amounts of information relevant and help for them. So I will put all of the details in the notes, and it's menopause support.
MenopauseSupport.co.uk. Yeah, that's where you can find out more about what we do, and you can get your hands on all of those free resources.
Great. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.